I'm really hoping you've got some good questions for these very good speakers. Um, we had a few that were on our minds, and so just to get the ball rolling, I'm going to throw some over unless I'm overwhelmed by hands going up right this minute. Okay, I'm overwhelmed. Well, I'm encouraged. I'm positively encouraged. Why don't we throw it to you to ask a question, and then we'll see how it goes.
This is a question for Dr. Darvish. Thanks. Are you doing any work with human subjects right now? Are you doing any trials, or I don't think you mentioned that.
No, I didn't. Yeah, thank you for the question. Right now, we are at the preclinical stages because we have determined that some of the molecules that we have made that target this particular protein is able to distinguish normal brain from Alzheimer in a model, in a preclinical stages. So what we need to do is whenever, this is chemistry, when you find a target, then you find a lead compound, you have to make it now better based on what we know right now. So we need to be able to make molecules that bind better to this particular molecule. They cross the blood-brain barrier. The brain is a privileged organ. It doesn't like stuff to go in it that it doesn't like. So we have to make molecules so it says, yeah, that's okay, you can come in, that kind of thing. So we have to make it a little bit better than that. So we're not there yet in the human trials yet. We're at the preclinical stages right now.
Dr. Gujar, you mentioned using viruses to cure cancer, but I wasn't clear on whether you inject the virus directly into the cancer or is it a systemic treatment? And if it is systemic, do you foresee at some point having childhood inoculations the same as you do now for MMR that would include cancer?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, and that's a great question. Right now, we can use both the ways to target cancer. So let's say, for example, somebody has melanoma, which is accessible cancer. You can inject right in cancer, and that way you are delivering that virus right where cancer cells are. But then you could also have cancers that are not accessible for direct injections. In those cases, so let's say, for example, you have something inside your body that is already diagnosed, you can give via blood. So just like if you go in clinic and you have saline given to you or any drugs that are given through IV, your virus can also be given via bloodstream so that now it reaches your cancer cells and then it starts killing. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Do you see it being a childhood vaccination?
Right. So in terms of vaccinations, cancer, the cancer vaccines, yes, that could be a possibility of the future where you are giving people or you're training people's immune system for different type of cancers. Right? And then we are working on one of the really exciting project in collaboration with DMIF right now that we have figured out a signature, or we are figuring out the signature of each cancer that is distinct from your normal cell. Right? Because if you think about it, your cancer is no different than your normal cell. It is just a deviation of what you have. So if, let's say, for example, you talked about skin cancer, it comes from your healthy skin. Right? So then you have to figure out what is it that makes my cancer different from my normal tissue. Once you have that identifier, then you can use that to create your vaccine. And that's what we are doing. And so far, it hasn't been possible because the technologies were not there. Right? So now we can actually make those identification, put those in vaccine preps, and those preps can be used to do the vaccinations. So hopefully that's the future of cancer treatment, where you can actually use these vaccines so that people are immunized for certain types of cancers.
Thank you, Shashi. We have another question over here.
Thank you. This question's for Danny and sort of Sarah, perhaps. So my question is just around the osteoarthritis area. And it's really exciting because we know that NSAIDs have significant problems, as well as we've got lots of issues around using opioid drugs for osteoarthritis. But we know that osteoarthritis has both a structural and a symptomatic component to it. And I guess my question is, it's almost trying to look at what the balance is, because we know that actually physical activity is one of the best ways to improve pain in individuals who have osteoarthritis. And we also know that when we actually direct a therapy at the pain, oftentimes people end up doing things that actually are not good for the structural component of the disease. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, I think it's kind of marrying these two approaches, because we know that that 68% of people who have osteoarthritis think that physical activity is bad for them. And people just like to have the silver bullet. They just want it to be gone. And I'm just trying to think about, like, from physical activity is not really a dynamic type of thing, whereas a drug or something that can take something away easily. And I'm just wondering if you can comment on, like, what the balance is.
We'll definitely share this in some way, for sure. I'll be brief in terms of the backstory. It's been contended for decades that osteoarthritis has a particular pathophysiology, and it's not been very well reflected or accepted in the literature until there was some work published in some really high-profile journals a few years back, including Nature. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, well, it's in Nature, it must be true then. And finally, after decades of work, patient work in the UK, people have now recognized some pathophysiological changes in an osteoarthritic joint, right? And Cheryl is correct in that if you think about the distribution of people who have pain from osteoarthritis, you've got people at the start of the curve, if it's a big curve, right? You've got people at the start of the curve who've got pain, but it can be managed with very simple and effective treatments like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. And then we got people at the whole other end of the spectrum who are in so much pain, their quality of life is in pieces, and they're on a waiting list to get on a waiting list to get on the waiting list to have their knees replaced. And then we have everyone else in the middle whose quality of life is really deteriorating fast. Their physical activity is starting to be compromised. They get into a vicious loop where they stop exercising, the pain gets worse, they start to get obese, there's more weight on the joints, activity goes down, and it's just on and on, this continuous progression. But I'll come back to the pathophysiology. It's been recognized that in osteoarthritic joints, there are abnormal formations of blood vessels that shouldn't be present in in a lot of these osteoarthritic joints, over 80% of them. And those abnormal blood vessels bring pain receptors to that site that should not be there, which leads to pain, which leads to patients referring for pain, right? But there's very little options for their treatment in the middle. So a group of Japanese doctors blocked the blood vessels that were feeding those pain receptors. And they use a drug that was engineered to kill resistant bacteria called pramoxine. And they blend pramoxine with a contrast in the clinic, and it makes these tiny little globules that degrade. And it's the best they got. And they injected these particles to block the blood flow into the vessels feeding all these pain receptors. And patients' pain scores plummeted. 45-minute procedure. They go from the highest pain scores to the lowest, and they stay low for 3 years at least, and we're only 3 years into the study right now. The doctors finished that first publication by saying, it'd be real nice if we didn't have to use this bloody drug, because using a drug like that for a condition like this, it's just not been engineered for it. It's very inappropriate, but it's giving pain relief. Be real nice if someone could make a small particle. I'm not joking. Be real nice if there was someone out there who knew how to make a small particle that would block blood flow in a vessel. And then they said it'd be nicer still if they could just make it degrade so that it's not going to come out of that vessel and do more damage. So I did what I do. I asked someone for, I asked someone for a few quid to see if I could make a prototype, and we made it. And I gave it to a clinical specialist in Montreal, and I said, just use it. Just tell me if it's good. I don't need you to tell me it's good. Just tell me if this is something worth spending my time on. He called me back, and he's like, we got to do something with this. So then I called a guy in Philadelphia, and I said, right, I trust you. You work for AstraZeneca. You've worked for 30 years in drug development. I need to know if this is something that really would help patients. I don't want to be in the room. These are the questions I'd like you to ask or probe. And that guy interviewed, I don't know, like lots and lots and lots of doctors from East Coast to West Coast, top of Canada to bottom of America. And he came back and he's like, time is of the essence here. We got to get this out as soon as we can, and we got to get it moving as quickly as possible, because the benefit of that procedure isn't just for the patient, it turns out. It's obviously for the patient first. But if you get a corticosteroid injection in your knee, it might last 3 months if you're lucky. Insurers hate that because it costs a lot every 3 months, while someone's waiting to get on the waiting list, to get on the waiting list, to get on the waiting list, right? So that's a problem. So we've got something now that can help insurers because it's cheaper. It'll help hospitals because it's very fast. It'll help doctors because they get compensated very well for doing these procedures. And it provides effective pain relief for 3 to 5 years, which will get people back to moving, hopefully, and get their pain levels down. I'll stop there and hand it back to Sarah.
Well, yeah, and I would just say it would be even better if we actually prevented it in the first place. Yeah, but when 15% of, only 15% of Canadians are active enough, I believe that's the, are meeting current physical activity recommendations. So there's a lot of work to do to get people moving more often. And I'm very conscious that I'm saying that as we've all been sitting for over an hour.
While you have the mic, I've got a question for you, Sarah. What, in your mind, what is unique about the Nova Scotia research ecosystem?
Yeah, great question. I'm not even sure if I know an answer to that. I think part of it is that we are small enough to get things done, but still big enough to make an impact. And I think that's, for me, what's been the real benefit of being here. I talked about, the province as a bit of a social laboratory. Right. I've also, I think, just heard from my colleagues just how easy it is to get things done here. And from my perspective as well, I can walk down the hill and walk back up again, of course, to see policymakers very easily, and we have the hospitals like literally on our doorstep. So I think there's something about our, particularly in Halifax, we do have that really kind of a very collaborative environment to do this kind of work, and only getting more so actually.
Thank you. Would you hand that down to Sultan? And while I have the mic, and I promise do I see any? I see somebody up. Oh, good. Okay. All right, let's go. Put
your hand up.
I'll get back to you, Sultan.
Please stand by.
Dr. Kirk, I think the work you're doing is really important. Most government spending is designed to improve or maintain health, yet despite the fact that we're so small and we can get lots done, it's ineffective. In your opinion, why is it so ineffective? And one example is the fact that private schools, which cost less per student than public schools, are more effective at maintaining healthy children.
That's a really, really great question. I think there's something about our culture within the Atlantic region, not just around Nova Scotia. There's something to do with, again, just the priorities that we set for our children. So math and literacy are major priorities. What our research has found that when kids are healthy and nourished and active, their math and literacy scores will actually improve. So we already know, again, so it's not for lack of knowledge. Ironically, we have all the knowledge that we need. I think part of the challenge within our region is people competing for very limited resources. So we're all fighting for the money, and we don't always work collaboratively. And that's one of the things that Uplift has really worked hard to do, is actually bring those different players together. So we are actually working with the 3 key systems that are responsible for the health of our kids: the Department of Health and Wellness, the Department of Education and the Nova Scotia Health Authority, and helping them to work better together to address that. But absolutely, I think that's been the real challenge. Is sometimes we're not actually really working for our own best interests.